Hello again, 102. In this video, we will continue in Chapter 27, and we'll start to analyze President Johnson's war on poverty and the Great Society and what sort of impact these programs had on American society. And there's still a couple more things we can talk about in the Civil Rights Movement. And Lyndon Baines Johnson, the towering Texan known as LBJ, was a graduate of Southwest Texas State Teachers College, and he took the presidential oath on board the plane that brought Kennedy's body back to Washington from Dallas. And you can see here Jacqueline still has her pink outfit on, and she's full of blood still. And it didn't take too long for him to take the oath of office, which again leads to many of the conspiracy theorists saying there's a lot more to the Kennedy assassination that meets the eye. And this is his wife, Lady Bird Johnson. Johnson had spent 26 years in Washington and served nearly a decade as one of the most powerful Democratic leaders ever in the Senate. He was the first Southern president since Woodrow Wilson, and he was a legislative magician who had excelled as the Senate Majority Leader. Johnson brought to the White House a dramatically different personality and style from that of his predecessor. Unlike Kennedy, who was born to great wealth, Johnson was a rags to riches story. With almost superhuman energy and crushing ambition, he had worked his way out of poverty during the Great Depression, and he became one of the Senate's most dominating figures. Johnson is a New Dealer personified. LBJ had none of the Kennedy elegance. His ego and insecurities were as massive as his vanity and ambition. George Reedy, the president's press secretary, said that Johnson was a man of too many paradoxes, as we'll see. Those who viewed Johnson as a stereotypical Southern conservative failed to appreciate his long-standing admiration for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the depth of his concern for the poor, and his bold support for the cause of civil rights, in part because he needed to win over the northern wing of the Democratic Party. "I'm going to be the best friend the Negro ever had," Johnson bragged to a member of the White House staff soon after becoming president. His commitment to civil rights was in part motivated by politics, in part his desire to bring the South into the mainstream of American life, and in part by his life experiences. His first teaching job was at an elementary school in Texas, serving Mexican-American children. The experience created in him a lifelong desire to help those poor little kids. Politics and poverty. And now they will succeed in pushing through some of these pieces of legislation that were stalled at the end of the Kennedy administration. All of these things Johnson will have a great deal to do with, and this kind of finished the Kennedy agenda, these three acts. The Revenue Act of 1964 provided a 20% reduction in tax rates. The top rate in 1964 was 91%. as compared to 39.6 today. This tax rate cut was intended to give consumers more money to spend so as to boost economic growth and create new jobs, and it worked as planned. And the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination in public accommodations and employment that we talked about in a previous video that had been stalled by Southern Democrats, now it's passed at the urging of President LBJ. He used his experience as the power broker in the Senate to launch his own risky crusade for racial justice as president. One senator who survived what came to be called the Johnson treatment said that the president would twist your arm off at the shoulder and beat your head with it if you did not agree to vote as he wanted. And the passage of the Civil Rights Act marked one of those extraordinary moments when the ideals of democracy, equal opportunity, and human dignity were affirmed by action. And without the assassination of JFK, this might not have happened for another decade. And this act also established the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission to ensure that employers treated job applicants equally, regardless of race, gender, or national origin. And the EEOC is still around today. And down with segregation. And this is a landmark piece of social legislation, ladies and gentlemen. Make no mistake about it. the War on Poverty. Johnson launched a much more elaborate legislative program of his own by declaring an unconditional war on poverty in America. Americans had rediscovered poverty in 1962 when the social critic Michael Harrington published a powerful expose, The Other America. Harrington revealed that more than 40 million people were mired in an invisible culture of poverty that held them in hostage in a vicious cycle. And the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 is the primary weapon in Johnson's war on poverty. It created the Office of Economic Opportunity and programs like Head Start and the Work-Study Financial Aid Program for low-income college students. And this war on poverty, and he went and visited this man, Tom Fletcher, who lived in rural Kentucky, who became the poster father for the war on poverty. But unfortunately, these programs did not really change him because he's in this culture of poverty. And in 1964, Congress also approved the Food Stamp Act, a program run by the Department of Agriculture to help poor people afford to buy groceries. And in the election of 1964, Johnson's now running on his own, and his successes in creating these different new social welfare programs triggered a Republican counterattack. Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, a wealthy department store owner, emerged as the blunt-talking leader of a growing conservative wing of the Republican Party. In his best-selling book, The Conscience of a Conservative, Goldwater called for ending the income tax and drastically reducing federal entitlement programs like Social Security. In his memoirs, Goldwater admitted that he knew he had no chance to win, not in 1964. I just wanted the conservatives to have a real voice in the country. As a candidate, Goldwater frightened many voters when he urged wholesale bombing of North Vietnam, which is going to end up happening. And he even suggested using atomic weapons, and the Democrats will have a very effective 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 television commercial, and then the big mushroom cloud comes up on TV. And Goldwater also criticized Johnson's war on poverty as a waste of money. He told students that the federal government should not provide any assistance for education, and he opposed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, having been one of only 6 Republican senators to vote against it. Johnson strategically portrayed himself as a responsible centrist, in contrast to Goldwater's extreme conservatism. And the result was a landslide. This is the height of the New Deal era in politics. Johnson polled 61% of the vote. Goldwater carried only Arizona and 5 states in the lower South. And Johnson won the electoral vote by a whopping 486 to 52. But Goldwater's success in the lower South, however, accelerated the region's shift to the Republican Party, and his candidacy proved to be a turning point in the development of a national conservative movement, inspiring a generation of young activists and the formation of conservative organizations that would transform the dynamics of American politics during the 1970s and 1980s. Their success would culminate in the presidency of Ronald Reagan, the Hollywood actor who co-chaired the California for Goldwater campaign in 1964. And in the next part, we'll pick up with Johnson's Great Society.